Have you ever walked out of a meeting or dinner, still smiling, yet feeling like something's crushing your chest? A sarcastic remark, a mocking glance. No one said your name, but somehow, it felt like the attack was meant just for you. And then comes the question, why me? You're not weak. You didn't do anything wrong. So why do some people take pleasure in tearing you down? Protecting your dignity, that's your job, and no one else can do it for you. But here's the hard part. Some people make that job feel like a full-time grind. You know the type. They sneak in sly digs at dinner, toss a cheap shot in the middle of a meeting, or crack a harmless joke that somehow leaves you feeling small. And in that moment, there's silence. That burning feeling in your chest isn't random. You smile like it's fine. You brush it off. But deep down, that voice whispers, "Why me? Do I look like someone who was made to be mocked?" You don't. And the truth is, it's not you. It's them. And today, I'm going to show you why they do it. 6 reasons, to be exact. More importantly, I'm going to show you how Stoicism, yes, that ancient philosophy from men in simple robes, can help you rise above it all. No yelling. No revenge fantasies. Tempting, but no. Just calm, clarity, and unshakable self-respect. So if you're done swallowing your pride and ready to stand tall, drop a yes in the comments, hit subscribe, tap that bell, and let's dive in. Reason 1. They sense weakness. Some people test boundaries the same way predators test prey. They don't announce their presence. They observe. They wait. And the moment they sense hesitation, the second you start to question your own worth, they move in. They strike where it hurts. Sometimes with a throwaway comment, sometimes with a joke that cuts far deeper than you let on. And if you let it slide, if you sit there in silence pretending you're okay, they take that as permission to push further. They don't stop on their own. They stop when you show them you're not the person they assumed you were. I remember early in my career, working under a manager with a tongue like a blade, not witty, cruel. The kind of person who could sniff out your insecurities and press right on them, like a bruise you thought you'd hidden. In meetings, he'd throw in lines like, "Maybe this is a bit too advanced for you," or "We'll let you catch up later." Always with that smirk. At first, I laughed it off, because everyone else did. I told myself not to take it personally, but the truth, I did. And here's what I need you to understand. Every single time I stayed quiet, every time I let it slide, it got worse. People like that aren't careless. They're intentional. They're testing how much you'll tolerate. And when you show them that you're willing to accept disrespect, you train them to keep pushing. That's exactly where Stoicism enters the picture. Many people mistake Stoicism for cold indifference or pretending not to care. But that's a myth. Real Stoicism is about understanding where your true power lies. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not external events." You can't control whether someone is rude or dismissive. You can't stop a person from trying to humiliate you. But you can choose whether or not they succeed. You decide whether their words shape your identity or bounce right off. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people won't say out loud. If you don't respect yourself, no one else will. If you accept humiliation without standing your ground, you invite it to return. Not because you deserve it, but because you've signaled you'll allow it. Human beings are wired to test boundaries. We all do it, whether we realize it or not. Some people push to see where your line is drawn, and if they find no line, they'll keep going. It's not always about cruelty. Sometimes it's simply about opportunity. And they'll take that opportunity until you take it back. What I've learned, and what I want you to see, is that standing up for yourself doesn't have to look like a fight. It's not about shouting. It's not about confrontation. Sometimes, it's a simple, firm boundary. It's choosing not to laugh when the joke is on you. It's meeting someone's gaze with calm silence instead of forced politeness. It's leaving the room quietly and confidently when your presence isn't valued. No apology, no explanation. That is Stoic strength. Not because it's emotionless, but because it's disciplined. You have to protect your dignity, not because someone else will, but because it belongs to you, and only you. As we continue the journey of reclaiming your self-respect, one powerful shift becomes clear. When you finally stand tall, the people who once tested you start to hesitate. The moment you draw a clear boundary, something changes. People can feel it, even if you don't say a word. The ones who used to push your limits begin to back off, often quickly. Why? Because they're not looking for someone strong. They're looking for someone easy to knock down. And now, you're no longer that person. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to justify your boundaries. All you have to do is hold them. That's enough. And here's where the lesson deepens. The respect you earn when you stand your ground doesn't just come from others. It begins with you. You begin to believe in your own strength. You start to trust that whatever life throws at you, you can handle it. Not by controlling the outside world, but by mastering how you respond to it. That's what Stoicism gives you. Not a shield to hide behind, but the armor to move through life upright, composed, and dignified. Reason 2. They want control. Humiliation is one of the oldest tools of control. Sometimes it's subtle, other times it's sharp and obvious. But the goal is always the same: to make you feel small, so they can feel big. When someone shames you in public, when they throw a cutting remark across the room, or reveal something personal they had no right to share, they're not just being mean, they're trying to take something from you. Your power, your voice, your dignity. They want to watch you shrink, because if you shrink, they get to stand taller, at least in their own eyes. But here's what most people don't realize. The person who humiliates others is often carrying deep wounds of their own. They feel powerless in their own life. But instead of facing that pain, instead of healing, they reach for the fastest shortcut to feeling strong, by making someone else feel weak. I remember working with a colleague who always found ways to put people in their place. And she often did it with a laugh, as if humor made cruelty somehow acceptable. One afternoon, during a team meeting, I presented an idea I had spent weeks developing. And without missing a beat, she cut me off with a sarcastic remark. A few people laughed, awkwardly. But it wasn't just what she said. It was when she said it. The timing, the precision, was meant to make me second-guess everything I had just shared. And for a split second, it worked. I felt heat rush to my face. A wave of urgency rose up in me, the need to defend myself, to explain why my idea mattered, why I belonged in that room. But I didn't, because something deep inside, call it instinct, or maybe something I had finally learned, told me the worst thing I could do in that moment was to play by her rules. Her power was never in the comment itself. It was in how I reacted. It was in whether or not I believed the lie she was trying to sell me, the lie that I wasn't good enough to speak up. And this is exactly where Stoicism reveals a truth that can change everything. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." So what does that really mean? It means people will try to humiliate you. They'll say things meant to wound you, sometimes to your face, sometimes behind your back. You can't stop them from trying, but you can stop them from succeeding. They cannot control your mind unless you hand over the reins. When you realize that, when you stop believing the lies others tell you about your worth, their power evaporates. Person who refuses to believe they're inferior cannot be humiliated. And not because they argue back or get the last word, but because they know who they are. You cannot tear down someone who has built their sense of self from the inside out. You cannot silence a person who doesn't rely on applause to know their value. If you take just one thing from this section, let it be this. Humiliation only works when you allow someone to convince you that you deserve it. You don't. And you never did. People who use humiliation as a weapon are simply revealing who they are. But how you respond, that reveals who you are. If you choose clarity over confusion, dignity over defensiveness, and mastery over your own mind, you'll find they quickly lose interest. Why? Because you are no longer prey. In the previous section, we saw that the moment you stop being prey, you begin to take back control. And it's that inner control that makes you untouchable. No one can manipulate what you refuse to hand over. You are not small. You are not someone who can be controlled because you've learned how to control yourself. That's the true power Stoicism gives you. Not a shield to block out hurtful words, but a mindset so clear and grounded that those words pass right through you, like wind slipping through open hands. There's nothing for them to cling to when you no longer give them weight. Reason. 3. They envy you. This may be the hardest truth to accept, but it's one you need to hear. Sometimes people humiliate you, not because something is wrong with you, but because something is deeply unsettled within them. The very things that make you admirable, your strength, your values, your success, become the source of their discomfort. When you stand tall, when you walk with quiet confidence, when you live by principles they abandoned long ago, your presence becomes a mirror, forcing them to confront everything they lack. And instead of rising to meet that reflection, they choose the easier way out. They tear you down. Not to correct you, but to silence the reminder that they've stopped trying to grow. Psychologists call this malicious envy, a darker, more destructive version of the normal envy we all feel from time to time. Research in emotional psychology shows that malicious envy often fuels something called schadenfreude, a twisted sense of pleasure when someone they envy stumbles or falls. They don't want to see you shine. Not because you're wrong, but because your light makes them feel dimmer. But they'll never admit that. So instead, they belittle you, they undermine you, they humiliate you in front of others. Not because they think you're weak, but because they know you're not. Seneca captured this beautifully when he wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor. A person can have everything, wealth, status, recognition, but still live in deep poverty if their soul is starved for peace. So what do? They lash out. They try to break others to fill what's missing in themselves. They attack the very thing they secretly desire, because it's easier to destroy someone else's light than to find their own. But once you understand this, something shifts inside you. The shame you once held in those moments starts to dissolve. You stop questioning yourself. You stop thinking maybe there's something wrong with me. And most importantly, you stop carrying their bitterness like it's your burden to bear. If anything, what replaces it isn't contempt. It's a quiet sense of pity. Not in a condescending way, but in a calm understanding that they are fighting demons you were never meant to fight. This is where Stoicism gives us clarity. You can't control what others say or do, but you can always control what you make it mean. So when someone tries to humiliate you out of envy, you don't shrink. You don't make yourself smaller to ease their discomfort. You stand your ground exactly where you are, rooted in who you are. Because their discomfort with your light was never your responsibility, and it never will be. If any part of this resonates with you, let me know by commenting yes below. Your voice matters, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Reason 4. You haven't set boundaries. Let's be honest. Have you ever made it crystal clear what you will and will not tolerate? Because if you don't, people will test you, and not always because they mean harm, at least not at first. Sometimes it's just human nature. People push limits, sometimes consciously, sometimes without realizing it, because they want to know where the line is. And if they don't see one, they assume there isn't one, so they keep pushing. A little joke at your expense here, a casual disregard there, and you stay silent. You tell yourself it's not worth the conflict, but then what happens? Little by little, they take up more space in your life, until one day you look around and realize you're standing in a space that no longer feels like your own. The things that once felt obvious, that you deserve respect, that your time matters, that your feelings carry weight. They're no longer the rules of the relationship. Disrespect has become the new normal, and you wonder, how did it get this far? If you're honest, it started the moment you didn't say enough. That's why Epictetus once warned, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. It sounds harsh, but it reveals a truth most people run from. Setting boundaries often comes at a social cost, and sometimes that cost is being misunderstood. People may misunderstand you. They might think you're cold, difficult, or even arrogant, especially those who once benefited from your silence. But if you truly want peace, here's something you must accept. You cannot have inner peace and universal approval at the same time. You cannot chase both. That's the clarity Stoicism offers. It teaches us that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of discipline. Peace is standing firm in your values and refusing to move from that spot, even if it means standing alone. Take Oprah Winfrey as an example. Early in her career, she worked as a young reporter for a TV station in Baltimore. She was told she wasn't fit for television. Her producers criticized her looks, her weight, even the way she spoke. The pressure to conform was intense. To reshape herself into someone who fit their mold of what was acceptable, and honestly, it would have been easy to bend, to become the version they told her she should be. But Oprah didn't bend. Instead, she drew a clear line. She refused to change her authentic self to earn the approval of people who couldn't see her worth. Eventually, she was fired from that position. Some may have seen that as proof she had failed. But she didn't, because Oprah understood what Epictetus meant when he said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Sometimes, you must be willing to be seen as naive, difficult, or even wrong. If it means staying true to your values, and we all know how her story turned out. Oprah went on to build a global empire, rooted in authenticity, empathy, and self-respect. She became one of the most influential and respected figures in the world, not because she adapted to someone else's definition of worth, but because she stood firm when it mattered most. That's the essence of Stoicism. You don't set boundaries so people will like you. You set them because you respect yourself. And when you do, when you calmly and consistently hold those boundaries, people will either learn to respect them or they'll walk away. Either way, you win peace. But let's be honest, it's not easy. It means being willing to be seen as difficult or foolish by people who only understand relationships built on silence and self-sacrifice. We learned that setting clear boundaries may lead to isolation. But that solitude, it's not weakness. True dignity often comes with solitude, and it creates strength, not fragility. When you begin to live from that space, grounded in self-respect, the world around you begins to adjust. Those who stay, they know where the line is. Those who can't accept it, they disappear, and they're no longer your concern. Reason 5. They seek an audience. Have you noticed? Humiliation rarely happens in private. It feeds on an audience. People who lack inner strength often gather a crowd, not for support, but to have silent accomplices to their cruelty. They need witnesses to make their actions feel valid, because without attention, their power feels hollow. And you've seen this happen. Maybe it was in a conference room. Someone in charge cuts down a colleague, not because of a mistake, but just to remind everyone who's in control. Or maybe it was in school. A quiet student gets targeted, not for doing anything wrong, but simply because they're an easy mark. The person being humiliated isn't chosen because they're weak. They're chosen because they're alone. That's how bullies work. They seek out the ones who stand alone and test if they can make them kneel. And here's the truth that makes it worse. The crowd magnifies the damage. There's an uncomfortable truth about human behavior. In groups, people are easier to manipulate. Psychology has a name for it: de-individuation. The process where individuals lose their sense of personal responsibility in a crowd. They'll laugh even when they don't want to. They'll stay silent even when they should speak, because the fear of being the next target keeps their mouths shut. The person leading the humiliation knows this. They rely on it. Their cruelty becomes a performance, using someone else's shame to entertain those too frightened to step in. But here's the truth. What looks like power is actually weakness in disguise. Someone who must rally others in order to tear someone down. They're already telling you who they are. Someone who can't stand on their own. Think about Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful men in history, surrounded by senators, generals, advisors, all bowing before him. And yet Marcus was known for his humility and restraint. He didn't humiliate others to prove his strength. In fact, he often reminded himself that the crowd's opinion was worthless if it came from those who lacked true understanding. He once wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." Marcus Aurelius knew that the approval of the crowd was fickle, shallow, and often driven by fear, not wisdom. True strength doesn't need applause. Here's the lesson. When someone tries to humiliate you publicly, their strongest weapon isn't their words. It's the reaction of the crowd. They want you to feel isolated, to believe that the laughter or silence around you is proof that you've lost. But their laughter is empty. Their silence is fear. And you owe them nothing, not a defense, not an explanation, not a single part of yourself. The Stoic path teaches this. Stand with dignity, even when surrounded by cowards. Be willing to walk alone rather than follow the crowd. And understand, those who need an audience to feel powerful are never as strong as they pretend to be. And You don't need a crowd to know your worth. You don't need the approval of those who cheer for the loudest voice in the room. What you need is a steady mind, a clear sense of right and wrong, and the discipline to remain upright, even when everything around you tries to make you fall. That's the core of Stoicism. That's where true power lives, not in the noise, not in the fear of others, but in the quiet, unshakable dignity of someone who refuses to be made small by the chaos of the crowd. If what you've just heard resonates with you, give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Because every time I uncover a new truth about life, I want you to be the first to hear it. Reason 6. They sense you don't know your own worth. This is the deepest wound, the one many people carry in silence. The experience of being humiliated before you've even discovered your own value. It often happens early in life, or during a time when we're unsure of who we are. And unfortunately, those who seek to humiliate others often sense it, almost as if they have a radar for uncertainty. But let's be clear, this isn't the kind of weakness people often assume. It's not about physical strength or intellect. It's the vulnerability of someone who hasn't yet realized how much they matter. Because if you truly knew who you were, if you were grounded in it, you wouldn't allow anyone to diminish you. Not because they wouldn't try, but because their words wouldn't land. The insult, the joke, the dismissal would bounce right off something solid inside you. But without that strong sense of self, you become exposed to the winds of other people's opinions. You sway back and forth trying to find balance because you haven't yet chosen where you stand. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." It's a line worth reading twice. Most people think freedom comes from money, reputation, or social status. But the truth? Freedom begins with self-mastery, and self-mastery begins with knowing who you are. When you don't know yourself, the world feels like a constant threat. But when you do, you become untouchable. Not because you're arrogant, but because you have a quiet confidence that no one can take away. In the previous section, we explored how discovering your self-worth makes you untouchable. No insult can land, no ridicule can hold. And Eleanor Roosevelt is living proof of that. She came from a family that was powerful, yet deeply dysfunctional. Her mother openly mocked her looks, calling her granny because of her perceived homeliness. Before she even reached her teenage years, she lost both parents. She was raised by relatives who constantly reminded her of how little they thought she was worth. She could have lived her life in the shadows, shrinking into the background, as everyone expected. But she didn't. Step by step, through education, through hard work, and through a growing clarity of moral conviction, Eleanor Roosevelt built a sense of self that no one could take away. As First Lady, she faced constant criticism. Her appearance, her voice, her activism, she was ridiculed publicly, dismissed. Privately, by people threatened by a woman who dared to step outside the box society had built for her. But she was ready. She had already done the hardest work of all, deciding who she was, and because of that, the humiliation never stuck. She kept fighting for human rights, for justice, for decency, not because it was popular, but because it was right. That's exactly what Stoicism teaches. No one can humiliate you without your consent. As Epictetus wrote, freedom is mastery over yourself. You don't gain it by fighting back at every insult or trying to silence every critic. You gain it by refusing to let them define how you see yourself. When you truly know your worth, insults become meaningless. Jokes become empty noise. Even praise can't shake you, Because your self-respect isn't dependent on whether others recognize it or not. Of course, this isn't easy. It takes work. It takes honest reflection, a deep look inward into who you are and what you stand for. It takes the courage to stand alone when no one else seems to understand. There is no shortcut to real freedom. You cannot beg people to respect you. You must claim it, quietly, without permission. And when you do, something incredible happens. The ones who tried to humiliate you, they lose interest. Their words no longer find a place to land. They fade away, not because the world changed, but because you did. So here's the truth. Some people will try to humiliate you. Some will test you. Some will envy you. And a few will do it simply because they can't handle your light. But here's the good news. You're not here to dim your light for anyone. Not anymore. You are not someone who begs for respect. You are someone who commands it. Quietly, confidently, and if necessary, alone. That is the Stoic way. When you stand your ground, when you refuse to believe the lies meant to make you feel small, something powerful happens. You become untouchable. Not because the world is kind, but because you are strong. If you're ready to live with that quiet power, if you're ready to rise above the noise, I invite you to take this journey with me. Hit subscribe, tap that bell, and join a community that's learning how to stand tall, no matter who tries to pull them down. And remember, the world doesn't give you dignity, you give it to yourself, and that's something no one can take away. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.